Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ILHAM and welcome to today's program, Malaysian rock music and development of subcultures with punk rocker and archivist Joe Kidd. This program is in conjunction with our current exhibition on level 5, Boom Boom Bang, Play and Parody in 1990s KL. Today, Joe Kidd will take us on a journey tracing the development of rock and alternative music and its attending youth subcultures in 90s Malaysia. Please welcome Joe Kidd.
Hello. Okay. Okay, aku sebenarnya when I'm preparing this, I realized that there's a whole hard disk of stuff left in Sabah. So this one is a bit more simple in that sense because I was supposed to bring along that hard disk with a lot of pictures, videos, and things to fit in together with this, but yeah. So anyway, um, first of all, the title about this thing was made by these guys. I don't really know. When I first saw the flyers, okay, this is the subject that I'm going to be talking about, which is fine, which is okay. Then before that, also I want to kind of like start with something about the archive that I'm running. I don't know whether you guys know the Rice Cooker Archive is the archive that I'm running, which is actually a combination of what I've been collecting since I was around 15 or 14. Back then, when I first found punk rock in 1978, I would go around with a razor in my bag so that I can go to libraries and cut out anything to do with subcultures and punk rock and all that. And I would have my own scrapbook on it, which is mostly lost now because of white ants, my parents' place. But anyway, I'm gonna show you a bit about, at least the stuff that I have. I'm gonna show you a video, like a small clip, which is gonna show my house in KL, which is now in the middle of being moved to Sabah. I'm moving to Sabah now. The space over there in Sabah is already done. So over there, I managed to get some second-hand racks and things like that. So it will be much more orderly than this one. Can I? Why is? Oops. Okay. Okay. So this is the audio just to show the space. So those are like cassettes that some of them been sorted, some haven't. Most of them like regional, Southeast Asia, mainly from the underground scene. Also, I collect a lot of bootleg cassettes from the 70s. Those are the CDs, and yeah. Up there, those are letters from the 80s. I used to write people overseas, Italy, Peru. Those are the fanzines on top there, the vinyl. And then further inside there, there's more things. These are my project, my design, when I do my fanzine and things like that, it's all inside here. Album covers, tape covers, the files for that. And then there is this cupboard with a lot of really old cassettes and a lot of early demo tapes and things like that. So all this now being in the process of being, half of it have gone to Sabah. So there's a lot more to go through to kind of send off. So yeah, just a small introduction to the archive that I'm doing. Okay, so the archive will be doing a lot of projects basically, and then since last year I stopped working basically. I'm a freelance designer, and I do work like book layout, websites and things like this, posters for film, whatever. And I got this nightmare client. Then it just dawned on me that there are things I want to do which kind of like being put aside because of the job and things like this. So last year I stopped. So now I'm just concentrating on this and also my band. Anyway, let's start to the first one. Okay, this is a bit because we're going to talk about subcultures, and meaning that we're going to be touching upon culture, subculture, counterculture, and all that, and that involves a lot about the different cycles of young people in Malaysia, how they pattern themselves into a certain cultural kind of area. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Do we need any? Oh, recording. So, this is a very in early 80s, I would say 82. I turned on the TV and I was halfway through this film, and this film is one of the few Malaysian feature that features young people in a very kind of like a rebellious mode. They're doing bad stuff, and they were wearing their leather jackets, and like a movie that kind of like goes back to when I first got into this sort of interest, mainly James Dean, A Rebel Without Cause, and also Marlon Brando's Wild Ones, and all this sort of stuff. So I'm just putting it there because I thought it'd be very interesting. After that, you don't see this sort of stuff anymore until about the 80s, when it became like a Mak Moto kind of, Mak Rempek kind of stories and things like this. And another interesting thing about this film is just that this is this is 1957. So this is like rock and roll in Malaysia. So the soundtrack was more like acoustic based, almost like Dylan, early Bob Dylan kind of way. The soundtrack is awesome. I like that. So, and that is because the director is from the Philippines. He's been doing a lot of great stuff in that way, more about the stories of the people, downtrodden, poor people, and things like that. Anyway, let's start. Okay, this is a recording of the first rock and roll pattern music in Malaysia. This is put out in 1957 by a singer called Julia Abu Bakar. I don't think we need to go on. Yeah, so I know that's Julia Abu Bakar, and that's how to say, before rock and roll kind of happened, during that time there's a lot of big bands, meaning that you got this orchestra, we call it orchestra in some ways, they got the wind instrument. You got a big lineup on the stage, and a lot of the time they were playing bossa nova and things like this. In 1955, Bill Haley put out this song, Rock Around the Clock, and it took about 2 years. Somehow then a Malaysian artist would cover it and started to kind of introduce that sort of rhythm to the locals. And even then also you must understand that at the time not many people have like record players or whatever, you know, and this was made on acetate, not so much vinyl as we know it today. So anyway, so that's, if you want to talk about the history of rock in Malaysia, rock and roll in Malaysia, then that's, for me, is one of the major introduction to the whole of the country. So let's start. What did I say there? Okay, so like I said, there over there. I'm going to just put in point form because I didn't have those files. Okay, so from mid to early 50s, you know, that mid to, yeah, is it mid to early? It was late. But anyway, so all big bands were around that time. So meaning that you either have that sort of Western kind of influence in terms of pop music of the times, or you have the traditional music, like even you go back to like Borea in Penang or Dikir Barat in Kelantan, whatever, all this kind of like more traditional kind of entertainment. So when you talk about rock and roll, there's nothing much there at that time. But I do believe there is this thing about people saying that rock and roll is some sort of a cultural imperialism or something like this, that coming from the Western world, and it's not originally from here. So we are actually kind of aping it in a way, like tiru the Western world. But for me, I would like to take a different stance on that, because I think rock and roll is embedded in everyone in terms of how you feel about things. It's just that the music that we have those days, if you really listen to like early traditional music too, it has the same energy, you know, until the government took over and turned it like really crappy and like soft and things like that. So rock and roll in a way cannot touch people everywhere, not just in Malaysia, everywhere, in kind of like getting out that primal thing in everybody. So that's the 50s. And then in the 60s, before Beatles start coming out, this is about England and all that, there was like skiffle, there's a form of music called skiffle, just like country with a bit of rock and roll. And then you have like surf music, or surf or garage music, in the sense that bands like the Shadows and the Spotniks and all those things, which don't have a singer. It's mainly instrumental guitar music. So in Malaysia at that time, early 60s, there are already bands who were trying to be like, to play like the Shadows. Everywhere basically, you know. And also one thing that I must not forget is that at that time, there's a war brewing in Vietnam, and the American Marines were there and all these things. So throughout the years, the American Marine needs to go for R&R, which is rest and relaxation, whatever, something like that. So they have to go away for 5 days. I think it was 5 days to 6 days, away from the war theater to kind of replenish their energy. And places that they would go is in Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur also, to some extent, but more in Singapore, and also Hong Kong. And one of the biggest influence was in Subic Bay in Manila. So over there, in all these places, they went there for, one of the main things, the girls, prostitution, this is part of war, and also music and fun. So there, these Americans who sometimes play their own music or bring records, and because of the business that they're generating, a lot of the pubs or the places where they're playing live, they started to look for local bands. And this is where a lot of the kind of like early rock and roll started to happen in the region, in Singapore especially, you know. And of course in Subic Bay. In Subic Bay, when I was there, I met a lot of people who told me a lot of stuff, that a lot of great bands started from there as pub bands, which is playing kind of whatever was happening in terms of rock and roll. Even when you talk about the 60s, then you talk about the Doors and stuff like that you heard on the Apocalypse Now film. So that's, after that, at one point, I'm going to go to the next one, in the mid-60s. In 1961, at that time, one of the biggest bands that been worshipped over here was the Shadows. But the Shadows became the backing band for Cliff Richard in England. And in November 1962, they came to play in Singapore and in Stadium Gallery here in KL. In the Singapore show, there were about 10,000 people. At that time, the bands who were instrumental bands, no singers, right? When they saw the way Cliff Richard sing with the Shadows at the backing band and everything, they start to think that, oh, maybe we should find singers too, you know? So bands like the Swallows, who was playing, I don't know whether you know the band called the Swallows. It's one of my favorite bands in the 60s from Singapore. They started to get singers, and they got Kasim Slamat as the singer. I mean, this is just one example. So you got like A. Ramlee, all those guys who just started to join in with the band, and also with the female artists and all this. And because of that, there is this new kind of situation in the sense that I would say a lot of young people at that time started to have their own kind of life. They have their own fashion. They have their own kind of culture, different from their parents, from the older people, meaning that they have their own subculture. So that's starting their own thing. The way they talk, the way they play music, the music that they listen to, the way they dance, you know, like from at that time, the twist was very, very big. Big enough to become a worry for the government. They were trying to stop it. You know, they are saying that, these youth nowadays are just aping the West, you know, and they're losing the culture and all those things, you know. So that's how things worked out to become, for me, in the mid-60s onward. It's the time of, for me personally, I would say that's the golden era of local music in that sense. Because these guys, all these bands, they do not ape or trying to be 100% the same as Herman Hermit or Beatles or whatever, or Rolling Stone or bands. No, they took all these ideas and mixed it up with the local flavor. The way they sing, the lyrics that they sing about, it's very much Malay kind of themes, you know? And musically, they do have the twangy guitar, sometime around the end of the 60s, they have like all the distortion coming in and all that, but still, it's pretty much a very, very Malay kind of thing. I'm not just saying about the Malays though. I mean, earlier there was bands like the Stylers and all these bands in Singapore, which were English-based, I mean, English language, you know, and they were quite earlier. And then because the same thing is happening in Hong Kong, they were doing Mandarin and Cantonese in this sort of new rock and roll kind of way. But the way it hits the Malay community for me is a lot more interesting because there is this really solid conservative way of life among us. I mean, even when I was younger, it's very much a conservative way of living, and also religious in that sense. So for these young people to get out from there and to kind of challenge that, you know, for me it's something that's exciting for me to see, because there is this form of rebellion that's happening at that time. So yeah, that became really big. In 1964, late 1964, there was a band who went to the studio and recorded a song. Prior to that, the several 7-inches came out already from all these bands, but they were not big hits. But this one is called Susanna, put up by M. Osman and the Mods, put out in January 1965, if I'm not mistaken. That one was like really huge. Suddenly it was being picked up by the radio and all that. So it became like almost a focal point to all the bands that were around there, and more bands were forming. And even to the point that P. Ramlee, which I don't know if you guys know P. Ramlee, which is like the icon in terms of filmmaking and also music, who was working in Singapore at the time, he set up a magazine about film and stuff, but also a lot of the pages is about all these bands. So I have several copies of it. And the amazing thing that you got to know that there were bands in the deepest of Temerloh, in Pahang, in Perlis. Everywhere there were bands. And all these bands from Singapore, they were playing Terengganu in Kelantan, and they would go to the east, to Sarawak, Sabah, And then you got to know about the scene, the rock and roll scene happening in Sabah, in Borneo, North Borneo, and in Sarawak. So, and with that, and then you see how the music that they put out, which is very original from our point of view, even though it's very much indebted to the Western way of doing things. For me, that's why I call it as a golden era of our music scene, actually. But of course, it doesn't last very long. By about, it started about 65, a lot of bands. Another thing that happened was record labels saw this thing happening. Of course, being businessmen, there's so many record labels started up, and so many bands got signed up, and so many shows happening everywhere. Then you have this new thing called the bootleggers. So record labels that bootleg official recording and put out under their own brand, with kind of like less quality in a sense, because most of the time they just copy it in such a way that it's not from the main master. But anyway, that created also another thing, because from the fallout of that, they started to bootleg American, English, European kind of recordings and bring it here. So you suddenly see compilation that that was not released overseas, but it is released here because they put it all together. So and then the radio start to play in some of this stuff also. So for me, as a kid that grew up somewhere around in the late 70s, that was really helpful, because you can't really afford to buy vinyl at that time. And the cassette, the titles that was put up on cassette at that time is not so good. But during the punk era, during the punk and new wave era, you got so much great stuff that put up by these labels. Okay, so by the end of the 60s, other influences start to come in, and also because of the societal pressure upon the kids to kind of tone down a lot of their stuff. If you listen to the Swallows, the first few singles by them is amazing, really wild. And from the interviews that I heard when I was very young on listening to the SBC, the Singapore Broadcasting Corporation, they were like really, the guitarist would be like swinging his guitar on stage and rolling on the floor. The girls were like throwing stuff onto a stage and all these things like that, really wild. And so the Swallows for me was amazing. But then you can see how there is this need to be more commercial. I think the pressure from the record company, pressure from the society, pressure around you. So you can see the quality of the recording in terms of the energy that put out started to slow down. And by about 68, 69, you got Bollywood films that's always been huge over this side, becoming a part of the influence. So you got bands like the Sangam Boys would sing, like would took over like Hindustani film hits and turn it into their own, using the same guitar, the same distortion, things like this, but it mellowed down a lot. So for me personally, as a fan, that was like almost like the death of the golden era of. Also, another thing I have to tell you, a lot of people call this era as pop yeah yeah, but pop yeah yeah
is actually a new term that was introduced in the early 80s because some of the old people from the 60s who kind of reformed their band, trying to play again, they, they, uh, they decided to find a word for a name for this type of music. Because at that time it was just called pop. And P. Ramlee put out this term, kugiran, kumpulan gitar rancak. 3 words together, kugiran. So once that happened, in that sense, you got also the influence of traditional dandut coming in from Indonesia. So again, it going further and further away from that rock and roll that I like. I mean, I'm talking in a very personal kind of, yeah. So anyway, so for me, that's the end of it in a sense. But then you got, as usual, subcultures will evolve. And by the late 60s, you got the hippies coming in. You know, those guys used to be picnic, or before that, turning into this more kind of drug-filled kind of generation with, how to say, kind of like pacifist kind of views, and you know, all peace, love, and you know, this sort of stuff, and a lot of drugs. So that is not alien to the scene in Malaysia also, because that comes through. Especially because we have this trail, the hippie trail, we call it, that started somewhere in maybe England or Turkey, goes to Iran, and goes down to India, and from India it goes down, heading to Bali, but the stopover is Penang. So Penang, back then, in the early 70s, they have a hill that's called Hippies Hill, Bukit Hippie. Because that's where they hang out and they do their thing and things like this, you know. So again, that's another form of kind of subcultural thing starting to happen again. And I think most of you know that in the early 70s, there was a few shows that happened, festivals, that was done by the bands themselves, and some, you know, even they hijacked the Scouts movement to do a big show in Cheras in 1972. Early 72, they have a Woodstock festival with 30 bands playing. And that one is legendary, even though I want to say about the importance of this archiving business, because it seems like a lot of this thing is being ignored or even being buried over by the powers that be, because there are things that they look upon as negative and they want to bury it, they want to forget it, it's very hard for you to really find it written down proper. So yeah, so that happened. And that also create another, because there is always this pushback, right? And then what happened was, because of the drugs, I mean, I'll tell you another story, because I put out the story on my blog many years ago, and this guy from Australia wrote to me and said, Joe, I was the one who brought in the drugs. Because the incident, and also the pictures that they have, and all these abandoned dancing, all the girls there, and all these things. And it's like a 3 nights and 2 days kind of festival. It became a big hoo-ha, controversial subject for the country. And you also have to remember, by that time, the country is undergoing some sort of existentialist kind of like dilemma. Earlier on, in the after the war in the 60s, that 50s, 60s, I would say that the Malaysian cities, at least the cities I'm talking about, they are a lot more liberal, they're a lot more permissive, you know? And by the late 70s, especially after the Iranian Revolution, when Khomeini came back to Iran and turned the country around into this kind of like theocracy, I think, this is my own kind of view or understanding, the Malays are mainly, they are Muslims. So as Muslim, you are always looking for your identity in a more kind of like solid way, because you see these liberal societies in Kuala Lumpur, in Penang, in all these places. So you need to, I think, because what happened in Iran, they started to think that, oh, we are Muslim. But the problem with that, because they go into the more kind of like fundamentalist kind of ideas instead of the more open thing. So that's the point that you can see in tandem what happened with that Woodstock Festival. The need, the government putting pressure, not just upon the young people of the times, but also the students. They were like stopping the students from doing a lot of stuff, the talks that they did at the universities and things like that. So like people's power is being under attack by the government, and that goes on. I think you can see what the result we have now. You know, like you got the University Act where university students can't be involved in politics or whatever, cannot talk about certain things and things like that. You know, so that's the interesting point of the early 70s. But of course, the music goes on. Music goes on. And by that time, I would like to go into kind of like in tandem with my life also. So I grew up in a small town in Terengganu, this very, very small town, which is well known as the biggest iron mining town that inside of the Terengganu inland, and then there's one railway, train tracks, that goes to the city of Dungun. Because over there, that's where they get the train to bring all the iron ores that they mine to send off over there. So I'm telling you this because back then, when I kind of conscious of what's happening, I think it was somewhere around 72, 73, something like that. And I started to listen to the radio, and then you can hear a lot of this, like Herman Hermits and all these things. This is like, early 60s and all that. And then that town that I was living in, it's not a town, like kind of a mining town, you see. So the houses are very well done because the operation was done by the British. During the war, the Japanese took over for a few years, then they lost and the British came back. So anyway, there are so much, in that sense, a lot of that sort of kind of like liberal cultural kind of stuff happening, not just in my town, which is called Bukit Besi or Iron Hill, and the main town, which is the Dungun. In Dungun, you got like tea dancers, you got record stores, you got bookstores. You can buy magazines from England, you can buy comics from Bino to whatever, you know what I mean? So that's like really different from the rest of the Terengganu, at least, but it's a bit more advanced. So when you talk about the time of the blues and things like that, which is the early 70s, I grew up, my friends, we were mainly, when we were about 10 years old, we were into films. So one of the things that we did was to go to because there is a stretch near the main road in Dungun. And by the time I moved to Dungun, where they were selling mangoes from Thailand. And we always go there because the mangoes comes with this crate, and in the crate, because to cover the mangoes, they have newspapers from Bangkok. And the newspapers in Bangkok will have a lot of movies. That sort of advertisement for movies coming. So we're gonna go there, grab it, cut it up, put it in our scrapbook, and then we say, "Oh, I got James Bond. You don't have James Bond." Yeah, things like that. You know what I mean? So, but around me, my brother's friends, they were all bedecked in denim jacket, denim, jeans, kickers, boots, long hair. They were the kutus, we call them. And they were very influential to me because they are the ones who were listening to a lot of great stuff. They were listening to blues, they were listening to Led Zeppelin, they were listening to Pink Floyd. So these are, I would say, a picture of what was happening among the Malay youth of the times, early 70s, up to the late 70s and all that. And I want to tell you this story where there is a bunch of young guys. I think they had left school, maybe they're in college or something like that. They lived just across the road from my mom's place where I was living. And they would sell burgers at night, right? And then after they closed down the burger stall, they go back and they would after a while, they would come out on the veranda across the road. At the time, I would be going to sleep. But I would always open the window to listen to them because they would be playing great blues, acoustic guitar and harp, blues harp. So I would go to sleep listening to them, you know. That's just a small picture of what's happening in Dungun at that time. I do believe Dungun is a bit weird in that sense, you know. Also, I have to tell you, Dungun is where you got that family with Mananga. You guys know Mananga? You don't know Mananga? You know that most of the great songs sung by Sudirman was written by Mananga. Okay, he's a great songwriter. And then his brother, who was handling a lot of gigs by Search, when Search was just beginning. So the whole family, the older brother was a cartoonist, Fatah, for Gila Gila, something like that, which is one of the more, our own Mad magazine. So anyway, Dungun was that. They have all these like really kind of like extraordinary kind of things happening. So yeah, so you got, also they started to listen to Deep Purple, because that's the point where rock has become harder. This is pre-metal, okay? It's pre-heavy metal. So yeah, so I was growing up around this thing, you know, the fashion, the ganja, because that's like almost like, because at that time I tell you, you are okay, you can have ganja around. The police would come and just confiscate from you and let you go home. Because there was no proper law against ganja at that time, against recreational grass. So, because when you talk about young people, music and subcultures, and drugs also is a part of it. And of course, the elements of it is really bad. Because by the 80s, by the I would say 83, 84, heroin was rampant. People were dying. But let's not go there yet. So, the late 70s, you start seeing kind of like Blues Gang. Blues Gang put out their album, the first album Anywhere, to somewhere around 75, if I'm not mistaken. And then in 79, you got Sweet Charity, which is the Deep Purple of Singapore, putting out their first album. So from my point of view, in terms of looking at rock music, things started to happen in a more kind of like mainstream way. So that's the 70s. And also, in my case, I'm gonna like flip through my case and all what's happening. In my case, in 1978, I found punk rock, which is like totally life-changing, because I was at that age, I was 14, and the punk bands at that time that was blowing up in UK or even in New York prior to that, they were just about 5 years old from me, you know. So when I've discovered it, I realized that it's just not just another form of rock and roll, because it become the democratization of playing music, in the sense that if you know 3 chords, form a band, man. So that's you don't really need to become like Jimmy Page. All of a sudden you go, oh my God, I can do this. You know, you listen to the Ramones, like alamak, 4 chord, 3 chord, okay. You know, so it really gives you, which is one I would like to get into, is the main thing about punk rock for me, how it inspired me so much and how it kicked butt for me. First of all, when you're a Malay kid growing up in Terengganu, a very conservative place. Maybe somebody is conservative, fine, but I really want to find myself. I mean, you can't. In that sort of environment, you are being molded, or what do you call it, groomed to be this certain person in their head. Not just your parents, also the society around you, the pas dara, mas dara, or even all this expectation that you're supposed to do and all these things. So when punk rock, the realization about what punk rock was about hit me, it gave me so much self-empowerment. And I believe a lot of my friends also at that time, because I started to kind of introduce it to my friends. Okay? So by the late 70s, we went through a lot of problems at school because of punk rock, new wave, this sort of stuff. And also, you got new wave of British heavy metal coming up, which is also awesome. So there's so much stuff happening with us, which the older generation do not understand. And again, when the older generation do not understand, you have your own fashion, you have your own way, you have your own thinking, you have your own politics, then that's your subculture. It's very simple that way. So we kind of like have this thing happening which nobody care about. So me and my friends, we started to kind of think about forming our own bands and things like this. But at that time, you guys have to remember to get guitars, and we come from poor family. I mean, we're not rich. I mean, to get like drum set also is like already like, oh my God, how are we gonna get this? So when we started out, we tried to kind of like play punk rock on a guitar capo, acoustic guitar, and it doesn't really work. But what happened was there is these connections between punk rock fans in the country. There was a magazine called, I can't remember what it's called now, shit. I must tell you that Marina Mahdi used to write for it. Marina Mahdi was studying in the UK, and she was writing about the Clash. She was writing about the Specials. Yeah. So anyway, that magazine, based in Singapore, I always, get it as many issues as I can when it came out. And they have, back then you don't have Tinder or things like this. So what you have is like, there's a page inside this magazine around the end that you send your picture and you put your address and what you like. I like Bee Gees, I like John Travolta, things like whatever. And then there's also another page called the swap shop, meaning that you can swap things. Or I have this poster of this. Anybody out there got a poster of Olivia Newton-John? Can we swap? Things like this. So that's how people get in touch with each other back then. So Singapore, Malaysia mainly. And me, being alone into punk rock, I wrote in one day saying that I'm looking for punk rockers in Malaysia. Is there anybody out there? Something like this. And sure enough, I got like about 9 letters from Penang, Petaling Jaya, Subang Jaya, Sentul. There's one guy in Kuantan. So that, all this kind of like, but it's not that many, but still, we have this kind of connection now. And from there, the knowledge about what's happening in terms of where can you find the letters bootleg. Somebody from Singapore will say, hey, they just put out Devo here, man. So, okay. So during school time, we would go school trips. Like for me, during the time of, prefects and librarians, they were always allowed to travel. Somehow I managed to squeeze myself into that. So we went to Singapore on the premise of checking out the libraries. I didn't go to the libraries. I went straight to the record store and get all the cassette, the Clash first album, Specials first album. I was going crazy even when we go to lunch, I was looking at there's one point I gave like 100 Sing dollar because we had to change the money. And I didn't take back the balance. I forgot. Because at that time it's so hard because not like now. And I mean I'm not listening to like Olivia Newton-John. I was listening to Stranglers. I was trying to get the Vibrators, 999, and not the bigger bands also. I mean all these like really And so it's very special. Whenever I found anything, or me and my friends found anything, you have your, what is it, that hair? The goosebump coming up, you know. So it's so special, which is the things that I think coming to what happening now in terms of music appreciation. It has become, I don't know whether it is true or not, but it becomes so disposable. There is, I don't know, I'm a nerd in terms of that, so I think very different. But anyway, probably I've gone away too far from that. But by the late 70s, you got a lot of the Malay pop because of the pressure by the government and everything. So everything goes down a lot more mellow. So you got Ahmad Nawab, Arwah, who just died, I think late last year. He wrote a lot of these songs, who kind of like mix very light jazz with Malay pop and things like that. So you got all this band also start playing kind of, by the early 80s, you got like city pop, more kind of Japanese kind of pop, and things like very mellow, which is, I'm from what, not rock lah, bukan rock. But you can also see the influence of bands from Japan, like Loudness and Earthshaker, and all these bands who are playing heavy metal, which is we added in with the prior influences of Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and all those guys, Rainbow. And then you got these guys, Sweet Charity, who has been doing that for a while, putting out the album very successfully. So then you started to see all these kutus who were just hanging out, getting stoned at the nearest bus stand. Now they are getting guitars and shit. And then so they start forming bands. And these are the guys who later on you would know as like left-handed. You know, you would know as like Rahim Ma'ruf and White Steel. You know, those guys that kind of form a revolution of Malay rock music in 1984, around that era. And that is amazing because they were, at that time, it was before the contracts. So the first Battle of the Bands compilation put out in 1984, that was like the bands were doing their own thing and go to a recording with possibility of getting a longer contract, right? So for me, that time, 84, 85, is like the purest time for all these bands, because by the time they sign up to all these labels, doesn't matter whether major label or indie, so-called indie label at that time, they were contracted to just do nothing but hits. You know, of course, there's a lot of hits. You know, a lot of people love it, but in terms of people like me who's kind of like more into that more, you know, wild abandonment, you don't see that much. You know, it become an industry that's very successful, but also throughout the 80s, kill off a lot of talents. Because I tell you this very simply: if you are a band, you are like, let's say 19, you got offered for a contract, of course, and you got a bit of money, which is the advance. Let's say you got 10,000 ringgit. Of course, you're not, wow, you're just gonna sign it. But when you sign it, you're signing your life away, because there are bands who lost the name of their own band. You know, there are people who lost the songs that they wrote through all this really one-sided contract. And the music industry at that time was really just trying to make you as ignorant as possible. And the advance money, that 10,000 I gave you just now, you have to pay back once the album starts selling. And by the first album is not selling, then you have to play more of the song that we asked you to do, which is written by M. Nasir. You know? So there are real talents throughout all this time, throughout all those bands, who just kind of lost it because they can't really grow, or how to say, to be better as a musician, as a songwriter, because everything be fed to them, and even how they look and things like this. So of course, punk rock, we come from the punk rock scene. I mean, I'll tell you this, when Battle of the Bands tour, because they were playing everywhere, they played in Kuantan. I went down from Dungun, from my burger store to some friends of mine to go and watch it. But I mean, we're not fans because we were already listening to Bad Brains at that time. We were already listening to like Dead Kennedys, man. I mean, then you see all these guys. I mean, yeah, okay, you know. But for us at that time, the thing is like the authenticity of being a rebel. You know what I mean? In that sense. But anyway, so the early 80s you got mud rock, which is huge. Or later on we call rock kapak. Rock kapak. And then later on, much later in the early 90s, rock syahdu, rock jiwang. So I hope I'm not like being too far away from the subject. And I stop there because I think there's a point where I'm going to go into a lot what I do to tell you the stories of what happened. So we don't like. Okay, can I have a drink first? Sorry, guys. So by the mid 80s. In the early 80s, me and my friends, the punk rockers, have started to write overseas because by about 81, 82, we got to know that punk rock was just not happening in England or in the US alone, or even the northern European countries. You got it in Cuba, man. You got punk rock in Italy, you got punk rock in Greece, you know? So all of a sudden, we are like writing to them. Writing to, you know. And they are very nice. They would send you LPs, they send you stuff. But of course, to a point, they started to ask, can you send us stuff from there? And of course, we were punk rockers going around with mohawk or whatever, you know, our army boots, which was canvas, green. We went to the batik shop to dye black. So, yeah, total DIY. So we don't have anything like that. So we don't have anything to send back to them. At one point, I think I was in college at that time. There's one point, there's this guy from UK who actually asked me to join their band called The Force from Coventry, but my mom didn't allow me to go to the UK. But anyway, he said, Joe, quit complaining. I mean, what you doing? I mean, the scene is how you do it, man. And it feels, I mean, there's more harsher words in that, but I'm not going to say it. What I'm saying is like, I felt like I've been slapped, you know? So that's the point where I actually stopped taking ganja, because I think ganja was making me really fucking lazy, man, so lazy. Then I started to do fanzine, my first fanzine. At that time, there's no fanzines yet in Malaysia. There was one that put out like almost like a newsletter by a friend of mine called Huru Hara, meaning chaos. But Huru Hara was only shown to friends, not really being printed out and stuff. So I sat down, and I have all these contacts overseas. So I start writing to bands in Poland, to bands in the UK, of course, and Italy and Finland, interviewing them for my fanzine. And that's kind of created another thing that kind of, how to say, in terms of the underground. So that's the start of almost, I could say, the underground scene start to rear its head, because we started to put up things, to put up our own product, and something that we can trade with the people overseas, you know. And you know, those back then, you know, the way we send our letters, we would soak the stamp. You know, you buy the stamp, and you put soap on it, like you get a bar soap to put on it. So when the stamp got stamped, you can erase that. So all the letters, at the end of the letters you send to everywhere overseas, it would say, P.S., send the stamp back. That's good for me. Yeah, so then that's how we kind of like, there's so many stuff that we did those days. It's very, very, and it's special in that sense, you know, because it's very hard to find what we like. At that time, of course, New Wave got kind of big. You can get Susie and the Banshees on a pirate cassette, Japan, Orchestra Maneuvers in the Dark, I think. Yeah, things like that, you know. Two-Way Army, Gary Newman, whatever. But we were into the hardcore stuff. Peggio punk from Italy, things like that, like Angry Samoans from the US and things like that. So what we did was kind of create another, the underground scene, the beginning of the underground scene. Meanwhile, on the more mainstream side, the major labels have started to sign up all the bands, all the rock bands, and turn them into this hit machine, doing a lot of surefire hit kind of thing. And they were very successful in that sense. But for me, a lot of this band lost a lot of their soul in doing that. And also, a lot of them nowadays, like 20, 30 years later, they are finding out the fact that they are not earning as much money as those who wrote the song for them. Because those guys are still getting the royalty, because the song's being played on the radio, but they just play on it, so they didn't get much, not even, So they end up opening up, like maybe if there'd be money, they open up some restaurant or burger stores again. I mean, something that they start from when they were in 17. It's very, very sad. And then I'm not making fun of them, but the whole music industry in Malaysia at that time was so. I mean, if you look at like overseas label like Elektra Records or something like that, who actually nurtured their artists to become something more than who they are at that point. So they're always putting out new stuff, always, exploring their own creativity, and they were allowed to, but we are not. Anyway, so there's a bunch of kids who were kind of like in the rock scene at that time who got so pissed off of that, and then they got into thrash metal. Metallica, Megadeth, Forbidden, Exodus, and all that stuff coming out in 83, 84, Slayer. So these rockers who used to wear spandex, like early Iron Maiden, where you got the stripes in it, like big hair and all that, started to wear just jeans, Stone, like the Ramones, punk rock t-shirt, got long hair, and start playing thrash metal. And that's the real beginning of the musical part of the underground, the subculture that started in Kuala Lumpur in 1986, 87. Because us in Terengganu and some other pockets in the country never ever had bands in that way. So the first few bands were Punisher. The singer used to sing with a rock band. What's the name? Yeah, yes. Yeah, Rosdat. And then you got people like Nemesis, is another band, Nemesis. And you got kids from everywhere. I would put the term as running away from their respective places. Kids from Kelantan go to KL. Me from Terengganu, my friends. Kids from Kluang, kids from Batu Pahat, kids from JB, from Alustar, from Perlis, from Penang. Everybody congregated at Central Market in about 87, around that time. And that's where the scene started to percolate. All these people who are running away. I would put it in a way, probably I'm just like kind of pushing it, but I would think a lot of us were just looking for ourselves, and then we just kind of find the space to do that even in the places that we come from. I mean, some people might be fine with it, but people like me, I don't think we can even stay sane, being told to do this and that. So we can all come down, it become a huge community in that sense. I mean, in the beginning, there might be just about 20 guys, And me, at that time, Terengganu, I was still in Terengganu, but in about 87, I was still in Terengganu. And because of my fanzine, I heard stuff percolating, because people sent letters. And there was this one pivotal moment. There's this guy named Luc Haas. He's from France, Strasbourg, in France. And Luc Haas writes for Maximum Rock and Roll, which is the Bible in the sense of the monthly main news for punk rock, for global news. That's printed in San Francisco. Unlike many other writers about punk rock for that magazine or for that fanzine, Luc Haas hate hated the American or the English or the North kind of Swedish kind of bands and punks, because for him it's so easy to be punk over there. A lot of the middle class kids who just, you know, the parents might just give them guitars and shit, you know what I mean? So he looked upon somewhere which is different, which is a lot more, how to say, adventurous, a lot more dangerous. So he went to Hungary, he went to the communist Poland and things like this. So he started to find underground music scene, mainly punk rock scene, or even post-punk that was not from the usual places. And he found out about us in Terengganu, and he wrote to us. So he came over. He came over in I think late 87, came over. On the way to Terengganu, where most of us were, he stopped over in KL, right? And he was walking around Pertama Complex there. Pertama Complex and Wilayah at the time is the place where you do all your jamming. The rehearsal spaces, there's Halayan, there's Amera, those places where you can actually trash the equipment, you know, in that sense. So, and he saw these names on the board of all these bands that coming to do rehearsals. And they were Punisher and Nemesis, and there's another one I can't remember now. I think it was Excuse, which is just Sherry's band. But anyway, Lucas saw this, immediately called me up and said, Joe, do you know this band? I said, what band? Then he mentioned me these names. And immediately I knew, because Punisher is actually from that comic. There's a comic of Punisher, and then a lot of us were really reading that. And it's not, Mark Rock would not be reading that comic, I'm sure. And then Nemesis is coming from 2000 AD, you know, which is the English comic. And immediately I knew, this is it. So another thing that we do our pilgrimage from Terengganu to come to Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur got all the records, most of the bigger titles. So we would come on a bus, stay over at some friend's place or some relative place, and we go to the record store the next day. We choose the vinyl, which one we want, and then we select which cassette we want it to be dubbed into. C90, 90 minutes, you probably got 2 albums full. 60 minutes, probably 1.5 album. And then you pay around 4 ringgit to about 8 ringgit, you know, depending on how long is the cassette. So, at that point when I heard about Punisher and Nemesis, my friend Shahlan, who later on sing with my band, he said, I'm going to KL to do some dubbing. And I said, please go to Central Market. Please go to Central Market and look for these guys and get their address. So that's the point that when he came back, he got Rosdan's address. So it's confirmed from my suspicion that the scene is starting in KL is like, alamak, you know, because there's nothing happening everywhere else, you know. This is 88, late 87. Of course, at that time also, there's a band that's starting out in Kuala Terengganu. It's called Malaria. And they just recorded a rehearsal. Those days, you go to the studio, you bring your Walkman or a mini compo, you record your session on tape, you call it a demo. Yeah. But anyway, I decided to come to Kuala Lumpur. And at that time, the bands are already, I think they are already playing at Kota Raya. I'm talking about the underground scene, okay? This is the beginning of the underground scene in the sense of having their own music and their own figures and their own bands. And I think there's a problem here where we don't champion a lot of these guys, a lot of the pioneers, a lot of the people who kind of, you know, do something else, which is from the normal. And I believe we fell into kind of like love a lot of bands overseas because there is this kind of industry of turning them into heroes, you know. Even some crappy bands becoming heroes also. That's beside the point. But what I'm saying is like, over here there is this, I don't know, they call it, what is it, like panchong, something like tall grass syndrome or something like this, where a band that, you know, got a bit of name, suddenly people don't want to support them anymore. You see? But, okay, back to the scene in Central Market. So we got kids from everywhere. So in the beginning, the underground music scene in Malaysia, which is centered around Central Market, I also have to tell you, Central Market was not just an underground music scene. It's not a venue. It's just several mama restaurant where you can hang out. You order a glass of teh tarik at 6 p.m. You can stay on until 10. So, everybody go there. And then the early days, you can smoke. So, yeah. But there were other like-minded people there, artists who do painting, seni rupa and all these things. You got photographers, you got poets, Central Market was like that. It's like almost a magnet that brings all these different people to come together. So, us being punks or mud trash or, would have friends who are not involved at all in music, Central Market was like that. And also, because at that time, it's very hard to find venues. So venues would come to you, or you go to a venue. What we used to do was to knock on their door and ask for time, usually before their whole business started, which is around 8. So you do matinee shows in the late evening. So places like Paradise, which is at Kota Raya, over there. There's a few more. At that time already, there's a mixture of new bands in the rock scene and the thrash metal bands playing together. Lipan Bara would play with Punisher or something like this. And when I came here, I started to be one of the main guys who do the flyers for the shows. So that's how the scene kind of started, and more kids start to turn out. You got Bacteria from Cheras who turned out later become Salander, which is like legendary now. And you got Rato from Kampung Medan, this is one of the first kind of black metal satanist kind of band. And I tell you about Rato, right? If we hang out at Central Market, there's a feeling of dread. Then you look behind your back, there is this guy with hair down like this, bell bottom black, walking like this. You can see the cloud over them. That's Rator. Very amazing. And the rumor says that their house, there's no electricity. They use all. And they have this huge pentagram in the middle. So you got all these bands started to coming up. Because the earliest scene, there's no KL people. We were just people from outside who were looking for space. But by about 89, 90, then you got all these local KLites hanging out with us and things. In 1989, there was a problem because what happened in Paradise Club was that the whole glass wall was broken because people were moshing. And incidences like that happened to a lot of these nightclubs that kind enough to have us in it. So there's no show for a while, and I got really worried because if you have a scene that is just in a way kind of starting up, Even the bands are just playing covers at that time, Punisher was the local Bay Area thrash kind of band. They're playing Metallica, they're playing Forbidden, they're playing stuff like that. And then you've got Nemesis, like more kind of like Teutonic and Slayer kind of band, Sodom, And so all these bands would take roles in playing certain sound in the thrash metal world. But no gigs. When there's no gig, there's possibilities that all these bands is going to be despondent, nothing happening, some even split up. So I took upon myself, I went to see traveling fan fest. Traveling fan fest? Fan fest where suddenly they open up this big giant tent somewhere, open space for like a full 3 months or something. So you have that everywhere in the country at that time. I think it's a tradition that goes on for a long time. So my first show, I went to Sunway, near the Pasar and Sunway there. And I went to see the guy who handles it. And I said, can I do a show here? Can I bring a couple of bands here and play? He said, sure, yeah, man. Because they have the stage, but no equipment though. They have the stage, 4 nights after nights. So my first show, I did it there with Pichagari, or Shrink, Pichagari, and Voices, which is X-Rattle kind of thing. And from then on, we started to do a lot of other fun fairs, from the one in Sentul, the one near the mall there, all these places, because there's no gig. But after that, we got places started up again at the Samoa House upstairs. And in 1991, I think 1990, 91, I got a call from a new venue called Metallica Lounge in Pertama Complex that wants me to do shows there. And that's the point that I think was the best. You imagine shows that started at 10 p.m., finish at 4 a.m. Yeah. So when you get off to the ground floor, you have like 30 minutes to wait for the first bus to go back to your house. So I know that's the beginning of a more kind of like cohesive movement going in terms of the underground music scene. At that time, in the upper stratas, in a sense, in 1988, one of the biggest promoters of pop music, what's his name? Roslan Aziz, is it? No, Roslan Aziz. What's his name? Box Office. Yeah, Ali Bakar. Ali Bakar kind of got interested in thrash metal bands, so he did the first thrash metal festival or something at Stadium Gara, 1988. Blackfire, which is, I forgot to tell you about Blackfire. Blackfire, in 1982, there was a band called Metal Ghost, formed in Perlis, up north there. And they would deny this. They were Satanists. I mean, by about 85, they changed the name to Blackfire. And Blackfire is almost like our elder who kind of started it all. And they started to sing in Malay. The influences were Venom, Celtic Frost, all the more kind of extreme death metal bands around there at that time. So anyway, they came to KL2 and play around the end. And they were supposed to play at that festival stadium, but they didn't. I don't know what happened. So anyway, you can sense that there is this interest coming from the industry in that sense. So a band that called Saxo, who was playing thrash metal also, will sign up. I think by Warnada or something like that. Can't remember now. And then they have to change their sound. As per usual, when you got signed, if you see the flyer, the poster for the show, for the thrash metal festival in 1988, if you see the handwritten blob around the pictures, that was me. I'll put under Saxo assholes because they betrayed the cause in some ways. They signed up with it. But anyway, so in 1991, I think, there was a bunch of musicians, young musicians, who was playing for pop stars in a studio at GM, formed their band called FTG. They were sessionists, basically. And they got together and they, under the same label but using different names, which is Karun Seni, they put out the first EP, which is the first extreme metal or anything related to the underground music scene that was recorded, 1991. So that's very, very important. And then after that, you got, of course, I was in touch with a friend of mine who was from my school days. His name is Mamat Boya, or Mak Boya. He was smart enough to be sent to Australia to study at Wollongong, near Sydney. His housemate who's these guys? Chromo. So Chromo was a bunch of Malaysian kids studying over there who formed a thrash metal band in, I think it was 86, 87, somewhere around there. And they stopped playing around Sydney and everything. And I think 89, they recorded that demo. And that demo was released here by VSP, Valentine Sound Production, which is the first label locally who were brave enough to take a chance with this new sound, this really something very new at that time. And of course, nowadays you all jaded already. But back then, it was something else. So immediately there is this feeling that there's something is happening in terms of the bands being brought over to a more kind of like stable kind of area where they can maybe live off what they're doing. I forgot, in 1990 there was a label called Noise Record, with a Z, Noise Record, who called me up to become the guy who signed up all these bands. And I was looking at Silent Death, I was looking at Nemesis, Punisher, all those bands to sign up under this label. And we went, they have an office near KLCC now. It's over that side, on the other side here. And they have like 2 studios in there. Because they're just beginning, they got a lot of money. And we thought, fuck, this is it, you know. So all these bands gonna go have a recording career, and we can push further. This is way earlier than Indonesia or anything like that, man. I mean, we were like really advanced in that sense. But about a month or 2 later, they were shuttered by the bank. Like huge, big lock there on the front of their door. So that's it. And only after that, the one I told you before, FTG come up with a cassette under Karun Seni, which is only one release, that's it. And then VSP come up with the Chromo. And that's the point where the underground scene started to think in a bigger kind of way. Because people forgot this. VSP never asked you to change your style. They never asked you to show them the lyrics. They never ask you this thing. What they do is they book the studio, they pay for the studio, put it out, give you royalty, right? So for the first time, I do believe, unless you are, what's his name? There was this band way back in the early 80s called the PBs. So the PBs was on their own production. So they had freedom in terms of their creativity. So they sounded like David Bowie playing reggae or something. Like really awesome band. They put out 3 albums, you have to look for them. But anyway, BSP was the first kind of independent label which just allowed the more riskier kind of work in terms of music to come up. And they were also getting contracts to distribute all the great labels in Europe, from Earache to Peace View Records to whatever. I mean, all these labels that which were building up around the late 80s with this thrash metal thing, and also after that, because from there, the beauty of it, that's where industrial metal start coming in. God, I mean, all this kind of like beautiful progression from one thing to a lot of different styles. I think that's one of the best era too. And also, at that time, you got a couple of younger kids who just listened to The Cure and listened to Sila Majid also. And a lot of the different, more alternative kind of music. This is, you guys have to remember, this is before Nirvana, okay? Before Nirvana breakthrough. So they were my friends. One of them is here. That's Andy there. But anyway, so we were like listening to everything. We were into thrash metal too, you know. Like if you ever listen to interviews with Radio AG, it's the same thing. He came from metal too. I mean, at that time you can't escape from the metal side of things. But we opened up our ears to different stuff. We're listening to like The Smiths, we're listening to R.E.M., we're listening to all this other kind of college rock, indie pop from everywhere. And so you have, also at that time, the black metal kids were not hanging out with the thrash metal kids anymore because they were lame. Now, so there is the, in terms of subculture, you always deal with this authenticity in terms of what you're into. Like, are you true or not? Are you true, not true? You know what I mean? So the black metal kids would be hanging out at another restaurant outside of Central Market called Ramzan. And you go there, it's all black. So anyway, so I, at that time, was so kind of like frustrated because I don't have money. I want to have my own label. I got so many great, talented friends around me in Central Market. You know, Noise Records didn't happen. So I decided to find a record label that would finance a sub-label, which I would handle. And so happened, one of the most rajin or very industrious, very, how to say, true in what they want to do is a band from Terengganu called Modar. Modar is a doom metal band that don't sound like any other doom metal band outside there. They're brilliant. So they came down here, they recorded a demo with Halayan, Man Halayan in Halayan studio. And then they shop it around and they met with Aban Rosman at FGM. And Man said like, maybe you should, you know, do another label or something, because, you know, FGM was doing what? What are the main artists? Zaitun Simeon. So you imagine this dark, you know, dank, doom metal band with Zaitun Simeon. I mean, tak kenal kan. So anyway, so after the meeting, Man atau Lan from Moda told me, Joe, I think you should go and see him. If you want to do this, you go and see him. So I went there, gave my idea, and I got it. He said yes. And the best thing about FGM is a 3-story building in Sentul. Downstairs is the whole pro studio, right? On the top of it is the office. On the topmost floor is where they do the cassettes. They have all the duplication machine and everything. So it's an in-house, almost kind of like you don't need anybody else at that time, you know? Because you're not thinking of putting it on vinyl anyway, it's just cassette. So on the way back to my house in Brickfield at that time, I remember I put out a book, exercise book, blank book, and designed the logo for Sonic Asylum Records. And that's the point. I was so happy I managed to record my friends, Infectious Maggots, which is, they were like, for me, one of the best, amazing band. If you guys know this industrial band from the US, industrial metal band called Fear Factory, Infectious Maggot was better than Fear Factory and before Fear Factory. Can you imagine that? These guys, they were listening to Sheila Majid, jazz, Yellow Jacket. They're listening to Earache record. They listen to Godflesh, Napalm Death. You know, so, and they have friends who can do programming. People like OG, remember OG and Wad, and those guys who can sample stuff and put it together with all this stuff that they're doing. Low down tune, really heavy guitar, and, you know, amazing grindcore. Basic grindcore, but with a lot of different elements. So that first album has always been my pride. It was called Deep Within. Yeah, Deep Within our Grief Factory. Milk runs red. Whoa, happy, man. I love it. But anyway, then there was the Pilgrim, a band from Kuantan. Their first album called Perfume Garden. Because these guys were reading like Khalil Gibran or whatever. You know what I mean? So, and then the next project, I mean, the first one was Moda, with the first album. I don't think people know, if you look at the cover, there's this dark, kind of like splotchy thing. That picture is a very fucked up picture of Batu Cave. So anyway, then at the end of it, at the end of 92, I gathered all my friends who were non-metal, friends who have bands at that point who are doing indie pop, who are doing like something else, or some punk or something like that. Because at that time, metal was the main thing. And that project was called A Circle of Friends. And because it was a circle of friends, because we were hanging out every night there, we might order one teh tarik and then stay there. And then after that, go out to the next Lorong Katak, hang out in Lorong Katak for like the whole night, you know, because Central Market closed at 10. So you have to go out. But anyway, so every night, we would take the bus and go to Sentul and spend our night in the studio. Let's say I'm recording my band and I need a backing vocal. Just wake up all these guys sleeping. Hey guys, wake up, you know, we need backing vocals. Okay, you know. And then people just, oh, okay. And then, oh, anyone can play piano? Oh, yeah, okay. You know, I mean, that sort of community. So A Circle of Friends is such a, for me, is such a passion project for me. Because these guys were at the forefront of the more alternative music, rock music kind of like revolution. This is before Nirvana, okay? We were listening to Nirvana when they were under Sub Pop, you know, at that time. You know, I mean, one time in 92, right? I think it was late 92, I was on a bus mini, and suddenly Nevermind came on the radio. I was like, huh? You know, because that is like the year, in a way, the year punk broke in that sense. You know what I mean? Suddenly it became this huge international phenomena. And all of a sudden, you'll be playing to 1,000 kids at that time in KL. You know, all of a sudden, all these kids found so much feel in what Kurt Cobain was saying, that they become this new breed, and they started their own scene, they started their own bands and things like that. So it goes on and on until now. Whereas in the mainstream world, in terms of rock, they have gone a lot more lame. They become rock lele. Lele means it's like so fluid that it's so, you know, I mean, it's not that fluid. I mean, kind of very slow moving liquid. Huh? Drooling, yeah, drool rock. So it becomes such an industry that, you know, a lot of these bands have been exploited by the same contracts and things like this. So the one who always make money has always been M. Nasir, because he's always write the song for them. In some way, I kind of like, I mean, I like Kumbara, but I'm just saying, this old band. But there is, I think, a lot of those people, they contributed to the fact that nowadays we don't have that many long-lasting talent among us, you know. We still have, from my point of view, two that's really amazing, Sheila Majid and Zainal Abidin. And both of them was under a great label by Roslan Aziz, RAP, because that label really go like to the hill, getting the best bassists around the world. They spend as much money they want to get the best result. And if you listen back to this recording under RAP, wow, man, amazing. So comparatively, they were allowed to be who they are, compared to the other labels who just forming you into something that's going to be a hit. I'll tell you a story. My office at Sonic Asylum Records, we share the office with FGM, which is the bigger label. And there's one time there was this woman, they brought in this woman who can really, really sing, because she started singing. And I asked her, can you sing? She sang like Johnny Mitchell. And she got this beautiful voice. And then the boss came in, hey, can you sound like Zatul Simon? See, you see that? I mean, immediately, you have this like really raw talent that you could have like go not just a season with it. You can go years with this person, you know what I mean? But, and this is just one incident, you know. This is how crappy the music industry was. Back in somewhere in the late 90s when I fell in more with the DIY punk scene because I love it so much more. a lot of people say, Joe, you are like anti-capitalist or blah, blah, blah. You know. But for me, no, it's just about, how to say, being fair. It's about fairness. Very simple, just fairness, you know what I mean? We're not anti-business. I mean, some of us maybe are anti-business, anarcho-punk, man. But what I'm saying is that there is need to have like an industry that understands, you know, how the artists work, how they live, what they need, and things like this, you know. And of course, that all is gone now because by the by the advent of social media and all that, it died. The whole industry died. What they have now is a new version. We just take all. Like nowadays, if you sign 100%. Your T-shirt is gonna go for them. Your gigs, money will go to them. Things like this. I'm depending on the contract, but most of it like that now. So those that you sign for just the music, and then you can do your merchandise on your own, whatever, you know. But anyway, in 1996, as per usual, when bands from the underground scene become more kind of out there, mainstream friendly is the word. You got like, you know, bands like OAG and Butterfinger become really big via EMI or Positive Tone, things like that. And of course, there will always be the pushback from the underground scene. So the DIY punk scene started to happen somewhere 95, 96. These guys, they totally don't want to be out there with the mainstream world at all. And these are lessons learned from the crash or conflict or the anarcho-punk scene of the UK and all those in Gilman or in California and all that. I mean, with principles who are basically anti-capitalist, anarchist kind of ideas, and very, very left-wing and all this thing. So I fell in with those guys instead because of what I see in the normal scene, you know. There was a point where two major labels asked me to meet them because they wanted to finance my own sub-label. I started another label called AGE, Alternative Garage Entertainment. As if I have a garage, I don't have a garage. But so that one put out the Pilgrim second album, and then they wanted me to kind of like finance me to do more projects, right? And the first thing I would do, because I'm a part of the scene, I come from the, you know, I play in bands also, so I would ask them, can we change the structure of the royalty payment? Before we start to talk about anything else, let's think about making it a lot more fair. And they said, no, we talk about it later. No? When they said that, I left. So there's twice I won't mention the label's name, but there's twice of that incident happened, and I got so fed up. That's why in the end I said, fuck this, I'm just gonna be with the anarcho-punk. And yeah, because I come from that kind of era anyway, you know what I mean? But I'm not the type who like to be in a silo. I would like to share the ideas I have. The problem with a lot of the DIY punk scene is that there is this need to be preaching to the already converted, to be in this hole, and which is what I don't agree with that. Anyway, so the revolution happened with a cassette called Revolution in 1996. 96, yeah. By a band called The Bollocks. The Bollocks put out a cassette called Revolution. And it was sold at 3 ringgit. And it's not been sold in any record store. So it's only like you go to the market, meet us, or through our friends. There's a distro called Asas Distro, which is putting out things like this. So this is like, in a way, like I said, it's this revolution in that sense that says that you don't need these parasites of middleman and all this. Because, can you imagine, very simply, you are labeled, you sign up this band. At that time, in the early 90s, at least through my experience, the cassette be selling at 13 ringgit, right? You know how much a band be making? For one cassette that is sold, 50 cents. You see? So, And there were like hundreds of bands that had to go through that. So the obvious thing to do is what, actually, funnily enough, there was this kind of like Pop Yaya revival guy called M. Sharif. M. Sharif, he's smart. He would record an album under his own production. He would sell it off to a big label and then sell it off to the pirate too at the same time. Smart. Because that's what happened anyway, right? Even to the point the Bollocks was put it up really DIY, anti all the shop, Even the mom and pop shop anywhere, no, cannot. They were pirated. Yeah, they were pirated. And the cassette was sold, instead of 3, at first it was 6, and then it was 9. You see? So what I'm saying is, the start of that DIY punk scene, hardcore punk scene for me is really, really important to me and myself and my band, and how we started to do things, without really caring about the more mainstream places. To the point that some friends of mine got really angry with me because I'm not helping them out anymore. But I thought, you guys already making it, you already do stuff, why do you need my help still, But, so, in the 90s, in the mid-90s, you got these two kind of like stream going. The mainstream-friendly alternative music from Positive Tone, and also people like Butterfingers and all that, so many. And then you got the underlying DIY punk stream, which is totally on their own and beyond the radar in terms of the mainstream world. And that one is still going on until today. And labels being done by kids in their bedroom. They put out cassettes here of, let's say, just write to some band in the US, I love your album, can I release it in Malaysia? Of course, man. So they put out here on cassette, let's say 100 copies, and traded that with other bands or labels overseas, and they started their own distro. So they start selling out the stuff to fanzine and things. It's a whole culture, a whole community, for me, which is a lot more berbalo in Malay, a lot more real in a sense, because it's interactive among human beings, not among people who are trying to make money off you without giving you back anything. And that's the beautiful thing. And then the connection in terms of the underground music scene of that time, in terms of, especially in terms of the DIY punk scene, we have friends everywhere. You have friends everywhere. It's like the term is a network of friends. At one point, I was in Brisbane to follow my girlfriend Ilan doing one of her first big exhibition in Brisbane. And after we put up all the artwork and stuff, I said, let's go see a punk rock show. Because I know Brisbane is the city of the Saints, if you know the Saints, which is one of the first punk band in the world, because they were coming out at the same time as Sex Pistols and all that, but in Australia. So anyway, I found a place called Railway Hotel. And when I got into that, I stepped inside there. Immediately, all these guys come in and talk. Immediately, I got 4 places to stay that night. I mean, that camaraderie, that's in terms of belonging to that scene, is amazing. My house here for decades was the bus station for all the punks from everywhere coming through or playing or whatever. They stay at my house. Swedish guys, whatever, you know what I mean? And the same with them also if I found myself anywhere. And that's the best thing about it. There are things I don't like about it, in the sense that a lot of musical produce or products kind of are stuck in the time warp. But otherwise, everything is just amazing in terms of the connection and all that. While when internet started to creep in by the late 90s, 97, I already kind of starting to play around with tripod.com. You remember tripod.com, where you can actually change the HTML and learn a bit of JavaScript, CSS. Where I started to learn how to make website for companies. That's why I was just like. But anyway, that's a time where there's a new way of connecting. You know, prior to that, you put your soap stamp kind of thing, send it everywhere, or you get RRC, which is you go to the post office, you pay, I think it was 5 ringgit or something like that. International reply coupon, IRC. So that's how you put it in so the other guy will send it back so you can use it still. Now you have the internet and chat groups. So that's the point that all of a sudden there is this, the younger guys started to come in, and then we started, I think there was a Yahoo group called Malaysian Underground, Yahoo group, something like that, where we talk about things. And the best thing also, the discussion have become to more than just music. We started to talk about the political side of things, which is amazing. This is where we started to talk about the rights of the LGBTQ people, you know, the people who are being oppressed around the country. We talk about ISA. We start having more kind of like political discourse among us at that time. And for me, I was feeling like really fired up by it because it's so good. And you got activist group, APA. I don't know whether you guys remember there's APA, the APA group, which always talk about what's happening in the country in terms of what the government is doing, things like this. You know what I mean? So there is a connection there and all these things. You know what I mean? And from there, it's also the death knell for the music industry as we know it at that time. Bands in the 2000s, mostly they say they are indie band. We are indie. You know why? Because there's no label to sign them up. So they have to do it themselves, so they become independent. Yeah. We, back then, were actively going against those labels who wanted us. You see, that's a huge difference. There is a certain understanding, a certain rebellion against the shitty stuff that was happening at that time. But it's both nice, beautiful, and also harder for a lot of bands. Younger bands nowadays, if they put up, they confidently printed out 500 CDs, I would say 350 CDs will be under their bed for the next many, many years. It's not like before. Those days you can sell, like, you know, when my band put out our second album, we put out 5,000 copies, it's gone, you know what I mean? Very different. Again, that comes to the point where I was saying about how we lost that, you know, the music become disposable, like I said. You don't got your goosebumps anymore, like before. The special feeling that you have upon music have become just blasé, just like, you know, okay, I can listen to it anytime, you know, I can, you know. So I think there's a different way of people nowadays, how they listen to music. But the best thing about all this streaming music is that a person of about 15 years old, which is, I think, is the best time to introduce your kids to music, at 14, 15, because if they like punk rock at that time, they're going to go all full-on punk rock, man. I talked about this with Billy Joe when Billy Joe Green Day, they were playing in Bangkok in 96, and I found myself in the airport because the flight was delayed and my flight was delayed. So I was hanging out with them. And Billy Joe was saying that he's giving his 10-year-old daughter listening to punk rock, and I said, no, that's not right, you know, because if you keep them too early, they're gonna grow up hating it, man. So anyway, where was I? Anyway, the business have become very, very different. So the bands has to really be actively doing their own thing. So you got bands like Hujan, which is, for me, in the early days of Hujan, they were amazing because they were, these three guys, we just like go around anywhere. Either busking or just stand in a corner and just trying to sell their CDs, you know. And for me, that's amazing. Because there's so many lazy guys, you know, I mean, they just sit around, got this 300 CDs printed. Okay, you know what I mean? So they were great. So that's the beginning of a new generation, in a way, alternative Malay music, you know. I can't really say it's rock even. Yeah, there's a bit of rock in it. But, you know, alternative Malay music started to become a thing in the mid-2000 onwards. And that's Hujan and all those guys, me, Uncle Hussein, all those guys, you know. And of course, they managed to, manage their business in such a way that they were successful. And then the underground punk rock thing still happening. The metal bands still happening. You know, even though they were in the early 2000s, they were attacked by the whole apparatus of the government, newspapers, even your parents at home, because some kids got arrested, you know, at a black metal gig when actually it's not. Yeah, it was an emo hardcore kind of show, and emo hardcore got some kind of darkened, kind of graphic and things, and they thought, this is black metal, you know, it's Satanist. So they got arrested, like 130 kids got taken into Brickfields police station. It first happened in Malacca, and it kind of like rolled, and then you got newspapers like Harian Metro attacking anything to do with metal, extreme metal, like saying this Pakcik Paku just burned the Quran, man, and things like this, you know. And like friends of mine who's in the metal scene were really affected by it. They can't play, and their shop got raided and things like this, you know. Terrible business. So in Harian Metro is really fucked up, man. I mean, really bad. They are like, I'll tell you this one story. When my band was having a bit of problem at the Kelana Jaya stadium, when we were attacked by people, because of the song that we have called Mari Menyanyi Menjilat. There were two writers for two newspapers who called me. One of them is Aziz from Utusan, which is the same building as Harian Metro. He said, Joe, your band going to apologize or not for what happened? And then I got Daryl Gold from the Star, who asked me the same question. I said, no. I told both of them, no. Well, I mean, why should we apologize? We were playing a song and then suddenly we got attacked. You know what came out the next day? The Malay paper came out saying, Kabur Tedang, my band, apologized. And the same day, the Star in English, the Star paper came out, the band is not going to apologize. So you got these two things. And from then on, I just hated this guy. I mean, even the whole institution, because they just, I don't know what they were trying to do that. Maybe they were trying to save us. I mean, no, I mean, we don't need that. So what I'm saying is the newspapers, the media mainly, because if you must also understand Malaysia is very young that way, not mature enough to have kind of really free press. So has always been managed some way, you know, especially in the early days. What happened going back to the 70s with the Woodstock Festival in Cheras, and the media and the moral panic of that day is still happening, you know, around then 2000, even go on, you know. Even nowadays, you know, shows that we have, especially metal shows, some organizers who are announce there's a band coming, blah blah blah, you get ready, you know, we got the page where you can get a ticket, blah blah blah. 2 days later, oh sorry, we have to cancel. You know why? Because somebody in the scene called the authorities saying these guys came in without any permit and things like this, you know what I mean? And I think one more thing before I go, I think I should just finish this up. Before I go, one other thing that we really always been struggling with in terms of performance art. I mean, I'm in a very broad sense, you know, from theater or music or whatever, performance art. You know that the licensing for a venue, no matter how big the venue is or how small the venue is, in KL is still just one permit, same permit. Meaning that you have to pay so much tax, so much. And that stops so much thing from happening. in terms of young people doing their own thing, which is, for me, has all been my life kind of cause. I want to see young people doing their own thing. For kids to be inspired, to be empowered, especially to become, or at least empowered to become themselves, or empowered to at least to step out from the comfort zone. There's a friend of mine here who's really great, but he's still living with his parents, which I don't really like. But he should go out from that and live out your own life, man. Look for, that's all I want to see, I think I should stop there. Thank you so much, guys. Question time.
We'll now open the floor out for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Okay.
So if anybody has questions, please raise your hand and a mic will be handed to you. Any questions?
Did I go overboard in terms of the time? Did I? Oh.
It's fine. It's fine. Any questions? Anybody?
Can you pass the mic to the guy? Thank you.
Oh. Thank you, man. Ada, buka. Ada. Yes. Ada. Dia rambut tengah kat sikit.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Ni joke start dengan mid 50s Dia
Yes.
punya dokumentasi ni.
Yeah.
Jadi boleh tahu kenapa dia start dengan mid 50s. Waktu era
Because-
perang.
Yeah.
Perang tahun 40-an.
It's post-war.
Ada post-war kan.
The
Ada
45,
tak?
Second World War and
Sebab
no,
saya
because we're talking about rock.
tadi nampak gambar Piramli yang mula tu.
Okay, that one is aku saja macam teaser lah, in the
teaser
sense that we were talking dari segi subcultures. And then at that time, that band Turuna something, which is Piramli's first band. Let's go back to that image.
Hello. Do I go there? First one, yeah. So that his band called Taruna something, which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's 1947 in Penang. So at this point, P. Ramlee, top right there, or left on your side. He's the man. I don't know if you guys don't know P. Ramlee. I think it's very sad if you don't know P. Ramlee. but anyway, P. Ramlee is like the man in terms of songwriting, filmmaking, and all that. He made such a great impact on the whole of the country. And this is his first band. And from what I heard, he would go around from one street to another in that clothing, in all those instruments for them to bust, yeah, ngameng. So mengameng, so get money and all that and go around, I don't know. I mean, there's a book that I have to refer again. But he was doing that. And at that time, he was very young. So what I'm saying is there a possibility that the way he was dressing and his friends were dressing up is not similar to his parents? So in a way, he was having his own way of living in a sense already, meaning that you already have your own music, your own way of dressing up, your own love for other things which is different from your parents, meaning that you are part of a subculture now, because you are now your own person. For me, that's what subculture is all about. So I was just putting it there, thinking that, that'd be interesting. I love the guy.
Inspired us.
Yeah, he's amazing. I mean, and like I said again,
For the rock music.
you know what?
Is inspired.
I tell you this. You know what? There's so many throughout all these many decades of the music scene in Malaysia, which could have been him also, but because of the way the industry was run, these people just left or being, So imagine throughout all these many years, bila kita cakap pasal music, P. Ramlee, Saloma. That's it. Right? This is like top, you know. Where are the rest? And this is, for me, is very, very sad for us, for all of us. You know? Anyway, so kita jawab ke saya? Okay. Yeah, that.
Can I answer this? Or okay.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Amazing talk. I was thinking fanzine.
Yeah.
Fanzine, what would be the internet equivalent now?
Fanzine is just a publication that was done by a fan. I mean, if you it comes from, I mean, if you know the history, it comes from science fiction back in even the 30s in England, I believe, where all these science fiction fans, you know, reading Jules Verne or something like this, started to like, oh, I need to get together with my friends and just start writing science fiction, you know, mainly fictional kind of tales and things like that. And then in terms of the punk rock scene, because that's where I got it from in that sense, because even before that there was a few. In Malaysia there was a fanzine prior to the punk scene. There was a fanzine by the Star newspaper, they call it a fanzine, but you know, it's like it's talk about games, like PlayStation, the early version of this. So it's run by David Arul from about 84 up to about 87 around then. So it's almost like a fanzine. And then in Singapore, there was Big O magazine, who started out in 1987, who just put a few A4 that was stapled and sent around, talking about bands. So anyway, if you talk about in terms of the equivalent in terms of the current world, then you got there's a lot of blogs. And I love the blogs who kind of like center around a certain area. Like, you know, and then I love the blog who just put up really high quality downloads, you know, for free. There's so many of them. And then you have the bigger, okay, you got Pitchfork and all the bigger kind of music magazines, so-called. I would call it more rather like music magazine. Because fanzine is more kind of like either a one-man show kind of thing. It's very DIY, very down to earth, doesn't have much or even advertisement apart from record labels run by their friends, things like this. So yeah, the fanzine is also another thing that I didn't touch much about. But after I did my 80s fanzine, 86, put out early 87. Then from there, there's a Aziz Rongat there with his fanzine. Before Vortex, there's another fanzine, can't remember, which is more on the metal side of things. And you got Nazri, my friend, with Revolusi. And there's another one with one Hamidi Hamid called, what's it called again? It's Parasite. And that's coming up to about 1990. And 91, by about 91, you got a lot of metal, extreme metal kind of. Oh, Midi here?
I think that's him.
That's my old friend. But anyway, so you got the extreme metal version of it start coming out also, especially in Singapore and all that. And also demo tapes. Bands, the earliest band would do their demo tape or rehearsal tape. It's around 87, 88, 89. Those are the ones that if I find anything, I'll go like you know, goosebumps, because they are very rare. They put out like maybe from 10 copies to about 50 copies, something like this, depending. But yeah, by the time Nirvana became this thing, everybody started to get into the whole alternative culture. And that's the point where in 94 I was running a column in the Sun newspaper called The Blasting Concept. The Blasting Concept comes out every week on its own page. And when, okay, the story is when Vincent Tan, which is a friend of Dr. Mahathir and all that, the millionaire, whatever, he took over an old newspaper, tabloid, which was at that time talking about UFOs. Can't remember the name of it already. New paper, something. UFOs, crime, and all these things. He took over that, he turned it into the Sun. And then he called in new graduates coming back from Australia. Among them, you got Stephen and Prem, who started Misakini later on. There's so many. I mean, and they called me up to join them because it's very fresh kind of beginning. And they want me to go there every day, and I said, no, I cannot wake up in the morning, and I don't like to kind of like be. So, and they said, what do you want, Joe? And I said, because I used to write for the Star newspaper back in the 80s. I said, I want a column. And the column is about the independent or the underground music scene in the region, or of course, especially in Malaysia. And one thing, I said, what is it? I don't want any advertisement on that page. And they were like, how are we going to make money? But, that's one page, man. The rest you can, whatever, put lah. And they said, yes. So in 1994, I started that weekly column, writing about the underground music scene, reviewing cassettes, rehearsals, whatever, releases and all that, gigs, interviewing bands, and even to the point of having like a poll. What was the best band of 1994? Something like this. But so we that became a focal point in that sense, and then the fanzine start coming in, because I started to ask for fanzine which I can review, and I got so many. It was so crazy. So by about, I think about 95, 97, around that period, there were a lot of fanzines, and this is written by everyone from everywhere, and of different topics, from personal trauma to like satanic metal, whatever, what I mean. So whatever, and it's amazing, because for me, this is the point where young people just putting forth their thoughts on paper for other people to share it with other people. Again, you have to remember this is pre-internet, pre that sort of social media and thing. So yeah, I hope that helped. Yeah. Anything else?
Hi, thank you. Hello? Yeah, thank you. I won't take too much. I just wanted to know your thoughts on whether subculture has lost its meaning with the introduction of the internet, and with kids after a while, whether they might be able to identify themselves with a specific sector. How would kids in 10 years feel authentic to themselves?
Okay, first of all, that's the worry. 'Cause I'm 60 years old this year. For me to talk about the kids nowadays, it's a bit off, man. So I don't think I would put myself in that position to judge them at all, because they are totally from a different world, basically. But yes, I've been reading up, thinking about it also, that main thing nowadays is algorithm. So it's the great algo that's controlling everything, even to the point of kind of like creating your very own subculture in that sense. And also most of the young people that I know, they kind of like just mishmash of everything. And for us, these old people from the scene who used to be true, don't think about it. It's different. It's a different thing. There's none of this thing about being authentic. This authentic kind of problem is not so much. Doesn't have that much meaning these days. That's what I'm saying, because it's different thing. You see, like I don't have TikTok, but I see people kind of like reposting TikTok on X or whatever. I can see. It's very strange, man. Yeah, like I say, I'm not in the position to really talk about that, being this guy who been around for a while. Yeah. Okay.
We can take one last question.
All right, Joe, man, it's good talk, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice. Just to touch on the last bit when you spoke about permits.
Yeah.
I'm from Singapore. Singapore is done off with the artist permit. So
What do
now
you mean?
Singapore is done off with the artist permit. You don't have to apply for an artist permit to perform in Singapore.
What about venues then? I mean, do venues still need to get a permit for
But
performance?
just licensing, like from Compass, for clearance for like copyright issues. But they don't need the government's permission to hold a gig.
Right.
Right. So in terms of the business, for example, not just the artist that has to pay permit, but the crew as well. So if your band has got 100 crew,
Mhm.
you're paying 100 extra, in terms of money,
Inclusive of the
inclusive
crew.
of all that.
Mm.
So Singapore has done away with that. So the perk is that if your band comes with 100 crew, you don't have to pay extra for the hundreds,
Right.
right?
Right.
But the plus point is that they make 15% withholding tax when the money leaves Singapore, and then
Come again.
because when the money leaves Singapore from the profit they make from the ticket sales,
Right.
the government makes 15% from the withholding tax, and then on top of that they get what is it now? It's 9% GST for every ticket sold.
Right.
Yeah. So that is the benefit. So much so now that they're building a 20,000 seater for just concert venue
Wow.
next to the indoor stadium now.
Is that for Coldplay?
Yeah. Well, partly that as well. Yeah. So just from the business aspect,
Yep.
like why is more competitive? Why more bands are playing a week in Singapore?
Yeah, we also have that. What happened? We have another thing I didn't tell you guys. In the early days, we would go to nightclubs. This is the late 80s, right? Ask the owner, can we do something here? They would say, okay, from 5 to about 8. Okay, you can do that. And when we lost that, then like I said before, I went to see a lot of us went to see the fun fairs, open air fun fairs. And then, even that one also is not stable, you see. And then we go to Dandu clubs in Chowkit, knock on their door. And we did shows there also. What I'm saying is, throughout the 90s, up to the end of the 90s, it was pretty hard. We have to find nightclubs who have the stage, and hopefully they have all the PA system and backline. But because of the problem that we have seen, in the late 90s, especially I would say one of the first one, the kids in the scene, in the DIY punk scene, especially the screamo scene of that time, there was a place called Seven Heaven in Seremban. It's not Seremban, Tampin. That they started to have a bigger space the license is for rehearsal studio, but you make it bigger. So you can fit like a lot more than just 5 person, So suddenly you have all these alternative venues that's run by the scene itself. And that is almost common nowadays. But of course, places like where I come from, Terengganu, of course, don't think about it, you can't. And some places are there. But everywhere, I would say, Penang, Johor, you got all these pockets of places to play. Recently, my band played in Melaka also, that's a space very west. I mean, they have their own backline, they got own PA and everything. And currently, for me, the best venue in terms of sound is Petai Belalang, which is near Zhongshan there. It's very, very good sound. I mean, you can sit at the front of the stage and your ears is not being heard at all. So there are, but when it comes to the bigger kind of shows, and then there's a certain problem there.
Yeah, like when you're doing like say a festival for
Yes.
that includes international acts,
Yeah.
then you're going to spend extra money just
Yeah.
paying, not just the money, but the paperwork takes a longer time.
And also what happened recently with that guy who's, kissing his bassist guitar. What's the name? Yeah. That's not what I'm saying, there are rules around that, like even Beyonce will have problems, So these are the things that we still kind of like fighting against in some sense.
What I see is now the bureaucracy is still a big problem.
It is, it is. And then there is this creeping fundamentalist Islamization coming into the government. I hope you guys heard that. Which is going to make it harder for freedom of expression in that sense, or for you to be yourself.
So we need another Joe Kid, man.
I'm old, man. I'm going to jaga my ayam. I got 8 ayam now. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I want to say, hold on. I want to say something. We got Dr. Taki. Is that Dr. Taki? Yes. So Taki, you there? He just put out a book on the history of rock from 1965. Was it? Yes. And it's a great book, really tebal. That's the man. Big hand, man. All right. Thank you, guys.